the Sunshine State. This is Tampa Bay's 10 Talk.
It's time for FLALAW, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
It is FLALAW live on the radio once again. It is that time of the week. We thank you for joining us. It's Tuesday at 5, so you know what that means. It's your live legal call-in talk show. As our intro is stated, we are the attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, and we host this show every Tuesday at 5 o'clock. We hope that you're one of our faithful listeners, but if you're new to the show, please share with a friend. Let everyone know that they're missing an opportunity and they got to get on now and tune in to the live legal call-in talk show that we have every Tuesday at 5. We're here for the next hour talking about personal injury law, civil litigation, and things of that nature. Throughout the month, we always have various guests that come on and talk about different areas of the law, but we specialize in personal injury, and you have two of the attorneys tonight from our firm, myself, Jacqlyn Bryant, and my colleague, Lorrie Robinson, who is a board-certified civil trial lawyer. And you have us both tonight, and I will, of course, give Lorrie an opportunity to say hello and reintroduce herself before we jump into tonight's show. I'm sure you know us well, but we always want to, of course, reintroduce ourselves to any new listeners that might be out there tonight. And as I said before, share with family members and friends. You never know who is going through a legal matter who might be able to benefit from what they hear on the show tonight. So definitely don't hesitate to share. And I'm going to let you know all the ways that you can tune in, especially if you're in your car right now and you want to be able to listen later or want to share it with someone who may be outside of our listening network. And that's okay, because we've got lots of options. So first and foremost, this is a live legal call-in talk show. So if you have a question, you are encouraged to call in live. We are live now. We're in the WTAN studio here in Clearwater, Florida. And we do want to hear from you. It makes for a great show when we have your questions and we can answer them live on the air. So the call-in number to do that is 727-441-3000. Again, that's 727-441-3000. That's going to be the call-in number for the next hour for the show if you have questions. Now, if it's after the hour has passed and you want to give us a call at the office, not at the radio station, but if you call before 6 p.m., then of course call 727-441-3000. Myself and Lorrie Robinson will tackle your legal questions that you have and try to point you in the right direction. If it's not something that we do in terms of personal injury law, then we typically will let you know what area of law it is and what kinds of things you might expect, and maybe even give you a referral or encourage you to call us at the office so that we can get you a qualified attorney to speak with you on those issues. We do handle car accidents, slip and falls, personal injury, medical malpractice, work injuries, Social Security disability. So if you have questions in those realms, this is a great time to call in tonight, because you have a wealth of knowledge, especially more so with Lorrie than me. Lorrie obviously is an amazing attorney who's been doing this for a very long time, and she does it all. She does Social Security, she does workers' comp, also, of course, personal injury, auto, premises liability, you name it. And so you definitely have a treasure here tonight to be able to answer some of those questions. And then I'll chime in where I can, wherever I can. Of course, I'm being facetious when I say that one. Of course, I can answer your questions as well. And we are on Facebook and YouTube. We're streaming live tonight as usual as well. So if you have, again, people that are in the, maybe they're not in the immediate network, but they are in Florida, but they can't get our station, that's okay. They can get onto Facebook. We are live right now on Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers Facebook page. If you're a Facebook account user, just search our name, Perenich. You should see the red circle around the firm logo that lets you know that we are live. We are in the studio. You can see Lorrie and I here. That means you're in the right place if you find that live feed. We are also on YouTube. So if you're not a Facebook user, but you still want to listen to the live stream or watch it, that's okay. Just go over to YouTube and type in the same thing, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, injury lawyers into YouTube. You'll see the live feed there. And you can also ask your questions or comments in the comment section of either of those live streams. I'm looking at the Facebook one now. So if you have a question and you want to drop them in the Facebook comment section, you can do that. And I'll read those out over the air as well as they come in. And the same thing with YouTube. Our engineer, Ed, will let us know if we get any comments over there, and we'll answer those questions as they come in. With that being said, it's been a little while since Lorrie and I have been together on the show.
At least a month.
Yeah. So good to be back. We are kind of in the driver's seat once again. And Lorrie, of course, go ahead and reintroduce yourself for anybody that might be new who hasn't had a chance to hear from you on the show.
It's really always a pleasure to be here. And of course, I think we share so often how what a great environment the law firm is. A wealth of knowledge is contained within all of the experiences of the attorney. So of course, I'm a hometown girl here, and been very happy to be with the firm since 1998, which is amazing that's as long ago as it was. And you've been with the firm a long time too now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's coming up on almost 15 years.
I was trying to think, wow, man, it's really, it goes so fast. And
it does.
Had an interesting day today where I actually had a Social Security disability hearing this morning, and kind of a complex one. And then I just came out of a deposition in a dental malpractice case.
See, I told you she does it all, folks.
And my head's spinning, right? But it is, the law is very interesting, and it impacts people's lives in so many different ways, and so I'm grateful that we try to do what we can to help people basically, and also be available to answer any questions that you've got. So my mother always used to joke that it was really nice having a lawyer 24/7,
Yes.
So because all these questions come up, and actually, it's not that easy. Many people, how many times do you get a call where someone will think, well, now what do I owe you? When, we're very happy to share information and give some advice to help people, even if we aren't able to ultimately represent them.
Right. I think that to me is a great service to provide to the community. Like you said, it's very rare to have someone in the family or someone you can just go to and know that they'll kind of give you their insight from a legal perspective. But now, have that.
What's not rare though? People that aren't lawyers and actually don't know, but they think they know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, of course.
Everyone has an opinion.
And I feel, and I actually was thinking about this as I was preparing our outline today, going over some of the current events and topics that we're going to talk about. And I just thought about how AI is becoming really prevalent. And I don't know if you've seen it at all, but you have certain times where you'll have clients or someone respond, and it's like, I wonder if that was AI generated. Yeah. And it's like,
and more likely than not right now.
It's becoming a very big thing where people are relying pretty heavily on different AI platforms to generate just normal conversation and things and requests. And the law is an area I think that it gets very muddy because people, I think, are relying on some of those tools that aren't very accurate.
And it is great. I think we talked about it on one of our shows at one point, because it is actually very good.
Yeah, it's an excellent tool.
But it is not entirely reliable. And so that's where people can get themselves into a little bit of trouble, at least
lawyers included.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think that's quite interesting. We are seeing more and more of the empowerment of people that use these tools, and they think that, the law says this, right? And it's like, well, not quite. But I appreciate your effort in trying to engage in that conversation, but leave it to the experts. So you have experts tonight in personal injury who are here. And I think that's a great benefit to our community, our listeners, that if you have that question and you don't have an attorney in the family or someone you can just pick up the phone and talk to, this is a great time to do it over this next 45 minutes that you have to be able to ask those questions. So again, like, share, comment, get the word out to family members and friends, because you have us here for that FLA Live on the radio. And so what I love to do a lot of times with Lorrie is kind of go over current events, things that are going on in our local area. either in Florida or more locally in Clearwater and Pinellas County and things like that. So I found a couple things that you may or may not have seen already on the news that I like to try to get your take on and view them through a personal injury lens of an attorney who may be assisting someone in circumstances like this, so that our listeners have an understanding of how these things can sometimes be addressed or even play out if they were to go to court. And so there was one that I saw, I believe this was just last week, and I actually saw it on Facebook before I saw it on the news because where it happened was actually very close by one of my Facebook's friends' home.
Oh my gosh.
So they had the live and up close and personal of what actually happened. So I saw it from her post.
Oh my gosh.
Before I even saw it in the news. And of course it was actually kind of sad. I'm glad the deputy was okay. But there was a Pinellas County deputy who was hospitalized last week after being hit by a vehicle on Thursday night. According to Pinellas County deputies, he was working on an unrelated call, basically just out in the yard, I think, talking to, some, civilians about something that had happened, and he responded. And unfortunately, he was hit by a Ford Fusion that was traveling northbound on 104th Street around 9:45 p.m. The driver told the deputies that she had approached 106 Terrace and a vehicle in the southbound lane, so going the opposite direction of her, appeared to have its high beams activated, hindering her view of the police officer. So the front passenger side fender of the Ford hit Officer Anderson, throwing him to the ground. He was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, where he remains in stable condition with 2 skull fractures, a fractured wrist, and lacerations to his face. The driver of the Ford was not injured. Deputies said that she remained at the scene and cooperated with the investigation. The sheriff's office does not believe there was any impairment or speed as factors. So the driver was not charged with anything at the time. So that's quite interesting.
Yes.
Because we could kind of break it down a couple ways. Obviously, we have a deputy who's in the course and scope of his employment, responding to a call. He's out in someone's yard talking to whoever called him, I assume. And out of nowhere, this car comes and hits him, and he's clearly injured. He's hospitalized. So that's one aspect of things, because we could look at how that officer is going to manage, the injuries that he sustained, and is there an approach to what happened to him. Then we have a person who somehow leaves the roadway, and the reason is they say that the high beams somehow obstructed their view. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's very interesting that fact pattern should come up, because one of my dear friends, she is a bit older, was complaining. We were driving up on Easter, probably coming back when it was dark, from Newport Richey area. And I bet we've all noticed this, and she made a comment about, those headlights there, because whatever the type of headlights are that we all now have, the name escaping me at the moment, but I mean, basically they are very bright.
Yeah, they're a lot brighter nowadays. Yeah,
right, and very, very bright. And she was kind of acting like, in some way, this was a problem with that car, but of course, it really wasn't.
Yeah, it's just the normal kind of.
No, it really, and it is an issue. But as the driver, which of course I got on my high horse and told my friend, I said, no matter what, we have to be aware of that, because it is an issue at night. I mean, you've really got to be aware of it. So whatever happened to this person that caused them to somehow leave, I mean, there's going to be negligence that could be certainly asserted against the driver that hit the police officer.
Right.
I mean, that no question. Now, the police officer himself would have a workers' compensation type claim within the police department kind of thing. But he would still have a third party claim available against the driver that caused the accident. And I would think, although that I think we could all understand it. Actually, when I heard it, I could totally understand what she was saying, that it could be quite distracting. And I think that's one of the problems. It's the issue of the headlights, and we've talked so many times about the electric bicycles now. There are a lot of things happening that do present somewhat of a challenge, but it is the driver's responsibility.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Just obviously there's a defense that I assume they'll raise in regards to that, but what is the duty on the driver, even in the face of, let's say the sun is glaring in your face or there's high beam lights that are obstructing your view? What is the duty of the driver?
Right. I mean, you have to exercise reasonable care. And of course, we're lawyers. So people say, well, what does that mean? Well, it depends.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on the circumstances. But I would say, you got to be thinking ahead, honestly, of situations like that. I'm thinking a situation I had myself coming out of our parking lot, making a left-hand turn on Belcher several weeks ago. And I might have shared this before because it was actually quite shocking. So I was turning to go, and I don't like to go into the median. And I looked both ways. Traffic seemed completely clear. As I made my left-hand turn, thank goodness, in the corner of my eye, I saw this young boy on one of those long skateboard type scooters. And thank goodness, I avoided him. But part of what happened is it was at exactly the time of day the sun was actually in my eyes, and he was he wasn't a big target, so to speak, to see because he was a relatively young man and on this scooter that, and I thought, wow, well, so of course it's all understandable how it could occur, but had something happened where he was injured, and thank goodness it did not, there was no contact at all, but had that occurred, it really would have been on me, because the sun was there, but actually in that scenario, and I started doing that at that hour of the day, just go around the block. If you're in a position where you can't actually see, another situation, I'm sure you've had this happen, you're behind some big truck there at the stoplight. You can't really see the light. And so you have to be thinking defensively yourself.
Absolutely.
And obviously we get going, we're all on automatic pilot. That can happen so easily, but it is something that the driver does have that duty to exercise reasonable care. And that can always be a debatable thing. But if it's something, that's the sun, the headlights, the this, the that, and the option you have is you really you should not be proceeding when you can't actually see.
Exactly.
So that was, the lady should have pulled over to the side or something. I mean, she should not have proceeded if she couldn't see.
Right.
And what happens, of course, many times things are okay and you get by with it.
You somehow get through the glare
but
and whatever.
Then, and nothing happens, thank goodness, probably most times. But then there's that tragic circumstance. And so I always look at these, I did with my own situation, as kind of like a wake-up call, because we really do, we're driving, the cars are called dangerous instrumentalities under the law for obvious reasons. So no, that is one we could understand on a human level, but there certainly would be evidence of negligence on the part of the driver that hit the police officer.
Right. And so with that being said, obviously for the benefit of our listeners who may be in the situation of the woman who couldn't see past the lights that were glaring, what role does that play in the defense of the claim when, let's say, something like this goes before a jury? And obviously the burden is on the plaintiff to prove liability and to go through the duty and the causation and the damages. What role does that play, if any at all, if the defendant can say the lights were in my eyes, or the sun was in my eyes, or like a rainy day we had today, it was raining and my car just went out of control. I had no control over it because the roads were wet.
And that again, it's like, this is why I love being a lawyer all these years, because lawyers take whatever set of facts they've got and argue in favor of their side of the case. And it's why a person, if you are injured in an accident, and even if you're critical somewhat of your own involvement, you should actually have it reviewed by professionals in the area, because it really, the law has a concept called comparative negligence. And so there can be, and actually if you go all the way to a jury trial, the jury would be asked to apportion by percentage. Now, as we've talked about many times in the past couple of years, the law changed so that now if a jury decides that you are more than 50% responsible for your own accident, then there's no recovery at all. It did not used to be that way. It used to be apportioned out by percentages. But still, 50%, I mean, how does anyone establish what any of these percentages are? It's a matter, it's basically a factual determination that a jury of 6 people will make, if the case cannot be resolved otherwise. And so it depends. And obviously there can be things like, this lady, because the facts are apparently the police officer was in the yard. So this is not looking so good.
She got way off the roadway.
Yeah,
I believe,
but you can imagine that there might be, so arguably the young person that should also have been watching me too, and was in a position. So you could see where it may or may not be that your particular comparative negligence actually is more than 50% of the cause of some particular incident. But it really, things are so fact specific. It just really depends on the circumstances and actually, how people look at it, which many people, myself included, would be somewhat sympathetic in a way. If I wasn't a lawyer, I might look at it totally differently. But, those headlight beams.
Right. And that's kind of why I was bringing that up, because you could see how a jury might say, well, I feel bad. I mean, she couldn't see, and these LED lights are so bright these days,
and everyone will have had that experience, so it could be, so say there are other factors. Now the way this one went was a little bit more extreme, but you could imagine that being somewhat of a factor, but a jury could say, well, I don't think that was the major cause.
Right,
kind of
exactly. Thing. I gotcha. So going back to the deputy, and fortunately, it sounds like he's on the mend and there were no life-threatening injuries, but he got pretty banged up. He, like you mentioned before, would have a workers' compensation claim to assist with his medical and his wage loss. If he makes this third-party claim against the other driver, could you just tell our listeners a little bit about how that works when he's already making the medical and wage claim under workers' comp? What is there left to pursue then against the other person?
So workers' comp is a very limited system, which really will only compensate for the medical bills and the wage loss at 66 2/3% of the person's average weekly wage. So there's never any compensation under workers' compensation for actually the emotional distress, the pain and suffering that people go through.
Exactly
and of course, this is something, we so often have to counsel our workers' comp clients because it's so hard to believe. It seems so unfair that
in almost every single case we have to counsel on
yes, because it's just
it's hard for them to even believe,
because it seems unfair, and it is unfair.
It is
actually,
unfair.
In truth, I mean, there were policy arguments made to have because it's basically an administrative type system, but those limitations do not exist in what we would call a normal. What we call a third-party claim, but a auto accident claim against the at-fault driver, then you can recover the extent of your damages, and that would be something that would be in addition to what workers' comp is. Now, workers' compensation will have what they call a lien to be reimbursed a certain percentage of any payments they've actually made, because the law tries to protect against any kind of a double recovery. But it's still, we very often will have cases where the person has a workers' compensation claim, but they also had somebody outside the employer that was at fault, and it's possible and common to bring a claim in that situation against that person that caused the injury.
Exactly right. So it's not a double recovery in the sense that they recover from workers' comp to get their wages and medical, and then also make the claim for the same thing and get a second. It's essentially two separate claims, but there is a lien that has to be reimbursed back to workers' comp. So if you find yourself in a situation like that where you're hurt on the job or you have a motor vehicle accident while working, and there are complicating factors in terms of how to navigate those two systems, then these are the kinds of things that you absolutely should be calling us for and to assist, because you want an attorney, I think, in my humble opinion, that knows how to navigate both.
Yeah,
systems.
A lot of lawyers do not handle the workers' compensation cases any longer because of changes in the law, and it's very restrictive in the attorney's fees. And we spend a lot of time, frankly, handling those cases kind of honestly is a bit of a help to people. And, people that we have auto accident cases and other personal injury claims.
Yeah.
We'll certainly have workers' comp. So we continue to do that. But a lot of attorneys don't, or maybe they dabble in it a little bit. And so I actually am glad that we still have been willing to do that because people need the help. I mean, sometimes things will go smoothly. That's great. But fairly often they don't at some point. And I don't know, they're supposed to be what they call an ombudsman or something in Tallahassee. There's no way a person could handle it on their own.
Right. And that's the thing that I do enjoy, as you said, is that what we notice a lot of times is that there's just, what's the best way to put it? I don't want to point the fingers at claims handlers or what have you, but there's just the way the system treats injured workers, and there's just a big deficiency between justice at times and getting what you deserve and having the claim handled in the appropriate way sometimes just does not occur until an attorney gets involved.
Right. No, it's there are insurance companies, and I've certainly seen people where it has gone smooth for
there are times,
but normally, eventually, it doesn't, because they're not. They really kind of want to close their file. They don't want to keep paying money.
Yeah. And there will be certain benefits and things that the person is absolutely entitled to, but no one said anything. No one, offered it, and it's like, wow, So again, I am glad as well that we still do that. So let's take a short break before we jump into our next article. You kind of previewed a little bit when you mentioned e-bikes. So we will take a short commercial break, and then we will be back with myself and Lorrie Robinson with FLA Law live on the radio.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And we are back from that short commercial break. I hope you're still with us. This is FLA Law live on the radio. Thank you for tuning in to our live legal call-in talk show. And hopefully you have been listening with myself, Jacqlyn Bryant, and Lorrie Robinson. We're two attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes injury lawyers. And you have us for the next half hour or so to ask your legal questions live on the air, either through calling in at 727-441-3000, or you can drop your comments in our YouTube or Facebook live streams, and we will answer those out live over the air. As we mentioned at the start of the show, tonight's show will focus on personal injury law and negligence, civil litigation, and things of that nature. But of course, if you have a question in regards to something else, we can certainly address it and try to point you in the right direction and let you know what your options might be, and maybe even get your referral to a certain attorney who can assist you with that. But going back to what we've been talking to tonight, we love to go over some current events and things that are going on in our local community in Clearwater, Pinellas County, St. Pete, and sometimes we venture across the bridge in other parts of the state. But again, this is another local story in Clearwater. Not too long ago, unfortunately, it did not end as well for at least, the officers on the men, but unfortunately this resulted in a fatality. This was a Clearwater bicyclist who was sadly killed after being hit by vehicles that were involved in a crash. So basically what happened, it says that a bicycle was was killed after being hit by a vehicle involved in a crash on Saturday evening at a busy downtown intersection, according to the Clearwater Police Department. What we know is that the police identified the victim, Mr. Moran, who was 60 years old, Clearwater. Investigators say that Moran was on a bicycle waiting at the pedestrian crosswalk for the light at the intersection of Court Street in Missouri. So that is a pretty busy intersection.
Busy. Yeah.
When two vehicles were actually involved in a crash, the collision launched one of the vehicles into Moran.
Oh, gosh.
And so he was taken to Morton Plant Hospital, where he unfortunately later died. Police say that both drivers involved in the crash sustained non-life-threatening injuries. Of course, that intersection was shut down for quite some time, and then it was reopened after the investigation was complete. So that's a very sad situation, because you have a bicyclist who's there in an area that legally and lawfully they should be in, and he seems to have been waiting for the crosswalk in order to be able to enter the intersection, when out of nowhere this crash occurs. The car launches into him, and unfortunately his life is taken. And so there's very little that I can imagine this gentleman could have done, to avoid this kind of situation. But it always makes me just think of how vulnerable bicyclists are.
It sure does.
And we're seeing more and more of these kinds of accidents because of the popularity of e-bikes now. And so I just want to take a second or two just to give a little bit of advice or even tips that you might have for people like cyclists and pedestrians to try to make sure that they're aware, or even kind of be safer on the roadways. Is there anything that you would that stands out for you?
I think the main, and I don't know if there's anything this gentleman could have done. We don't know where he was, but obviously being clear of the intersection as much as possible in a scenario like that. But the typical thing that we see all the time, and where was I? I'm trying to think where I was at some intersection. It might have been Gulf Bay and Belcher. And here's this young guy,
very busy intersection,
walking through the traffic. Instead of going at the actual crosswalk, he's walking behind the cars and going through, and he looks at me and he kind of waves because he wants to be sure he's seen,
get your attention,
which is a good idea, but he was not a place he should have been. And the thing that's, you just have to assume that people don't see you. And it's so hard, it's hard. It's hard, for us to get that when you're walking or riding a bicycle. And likewise for the car, which I would say, and I've had this discussion with the friend I was mentioning about a few times, because it's easy to miss people, and it might even be technically sort of somehow their fault, but you can't look at it that way. You've got to really be looking for these situations. And I think particularly, again, to me, I look at as a wake-up call. So when we talk about these types of examples, it's a wake-up call to me too, because every single one of us, when we're driving, particularly if you're driving a route that you drive a lot and you're thinking about what you're going to.
Yeah, you get really relaxed.
Yeah, no, and
you're kind of, sometimes we even drive and we don't forget how we got there.
Right.
It's like,
that's a common phenomenon.
I'm home already.
And particularly on routes where, you've done it so many times. And then of course, most people will use their phones. I cannot walk and chew gum. So I have my personal rule, but it is not followed by anyone else I know.
You're in the minority.
I am totally, and I know it, but it's like, I'll take a call for, a particular message or something, but most people it's hands-free, and obviously, if you are thinking about it, you can drive carefully and be aware of it. But the other part of this equation is that obviously you are involved in something that is not driving.
Right.
And so it just means to be super aware of your environment and looking for things that could go wrong, basically.
Yes.
That was my father taught me that so many years ago when he taught me the beginnings of driving, defensive driving, look for what could happen and where you go. And then, but today, now this topic you're bringing up, which I do think it's so important, because particularly like at dusk, either sunset or in the morning, it's like it's easy not to see people, and there are so many of these electric bikes now.
Very much so. It's very popular.
Yeah. And understandably so. For a lot of people, really, a way they can get around where maybe they couldn't afford a car, maybe they've had problems, so they can't get a driver's license or something like that, And then, of course, the young kids don't have the level of experience that we older ones would have about how things can go wrong and watching out for it. But it's a big challenge. But obviously the most horrifying thing of all would be to be in an accident where you've caused somebody injury or death.
Yes.
No one wants that to happen. So, but.
Yeah, and we do this thing once a year where we go to elementary school and we kind of try to give them these kinds of tips. But I feel like as adults, we need these reminders as well that, you're just as vulnerable when you're out and you're cycling or you're, on an e-bike. You have to factor in the fact that not everyone's going to see you.
Right.
And so you have to take those steps as well. And helmets.
My gosh,
I know they're not popular. I know they don't look good. They might not do great things for your hair, but in the day, it could be the difference between living or dying.
Right.
And I don't know if that was a factor at all in this article that we read. I don't know if he was wearing a helmet, if a helmet would have changed the circumstances, but I'd rather err on the side of caution with that. Yeah.
And then you look at, of course, say you survive, but you have a traumatic brain injury, that's very debilitating.
Yeah.
Good to be alive, of course, but it's mostly just being on the alert is, again, that very tragic. But, it's mostly all any of us can do is the best we can just to try to stay alert and make sure if you're on a bike or you're walking, that if you're crossing, you make eye contact, make sure
absolutely
that you are seen.
Wear light colors, reflectors,
totally.
Those sorts
I would say,
of things,
how many times do you see people with dark clothing?
Yes.
And the worst time of all, of course, terrible at night, but even that crossover of dusk when it's it's not dark, but it's still not light. No, it's.
And I touched on it on a previous show, and this is for e-bike users specifically, especially those that may have the higher speed e-bikes. They should realize that what I think a lot of doctors are finding are that the helmets are not necessarily meant to sustain certain levels of speed. And when they're riding these e-bikes, they're not necessarily protected with just a general,
Interesting.
bike helmet. And they're kind of crossing into that territory of mopeds and motorcycle because of the speeds. So some of them are getting retrofitted to go faster than what they really should, and they're not adequately protected. And so you have to have the right kind of helmet to be riding at that sort of a speed. And so those are things that people need to figure out as well.
Yeah, and you can't really tell anybody anything, especially when we're younger. I remember that part. But I sure wish that in some way, just speaking about this as we do from time to time would plant a seed, because terrible injuries can happen with these bicycles, and they do go quite fast. And people are not as alert as they should be, and it doesn't do the bike rider any good to be mad about that. It's just the reality, and so they really need to do everything they can to be aware of that, because it is nice. I'm sure I've never been a motorcycle fan myself, but I rode on the back of one once because my godson talked me into it in Tennessee, and it was nice, I admit. But
you have that memory now.
That's right. But I've never done it since. Yeah. And, but obviously people do enjoy that experience. Got that. But you have to watch out for people. One of my friends often she always says things like, "People be stupid," and it's like, well, that's kind of true.
It's true.
So we have to be aware of
careful.
that.
Yeah.
Now, if something happens, God forbid, we're here to try to protect your rights and make a financial recovery. But you don't want to be in that situation. Obviously, no one does. If it can be avoided.
Yeah, and like we said, I don't see any facts in this article that would suggest there was any comparative fault at all on the bicyclist. It sounds like he was in a place that he should have been. Not knowing all the facts, but in a situation like this where there's an accident that has occurred and you have two vehicles that have now collided, and as a result of this kind of spin out, it has now also taken out someone who was on the sidewalk. How do you approach situations like this? Are both cars now considered in terms of, liability, or is it just the vehicle that caused the initial accident? How do you really look at that?
So it's obviously a lot of different possible ways to look at that, and it would require investigation, because it could be any of those choices. I mean, it could be that maybe there was one car that knocked the other car, and the other car wasn't doing anything wrong, and there's really nothing they could do. Well, obviously in that scenario, it wouldn't be, there'd be no negligence on the part of that car. But, most times there's some degree, and it kind of goes back to what we've been talking about, because it's so important to stay on the alert, and it's hard. And obviously, even like, when you're driving down the road, you're supposed to keep a certain distance between you and the car ahead of you so that you can respond. But obviously, that isn't too easy to do in certain situations on busier roads.
Right.
People are not of the same mind, even if you are.
Right.
So it's very difficult. But those factors, so you'd have to find out through investigation, what really were the causes, and it might be several, or it might be the one.
Exactly. And one of our attorneys, I think Brian Caulfield, had a very similar case down in St. Pete. Fortunately, the individual that was standing on the sidewalk did not die in his case, but the vehicle, I think, ended up on top of the gentleman, and he sustained some really serious injuries. And I think in that situation, that's what I believe Brian's investigation was able to uncover, that it wasn't the initial vehicle that you might have assumed, but there was a speed factor going on in terms of how the other car entered the intersection, and something along those lines where it did end up presenting liability on multiple sides. So that's very, very common when you have a case like this, that there's usually more than what meets the eye at times.
Right.
So again, these are cases that you definitely want to have evaluated and reviewed properly to understand what happens, because what people may not realize in a case like this, where you have a death and you have probably maybe another injured party in one of the vehicles, and then there's property damage, and there's all kinds of things that are happening, and you may have a smaller policy, then you get a call from the insurance company, hey, we're going to tender our limits to you. And it's like, wait a minute, what is going on?
Right.
And you might think that that's all that there is, and accept that check and sign off on the release. And now you are in a position where you can't, back out of it. So a lot can happen in a scenario like that. And a lot of times people think, well, the other person died, and that makes sense for them to get what they got. And you just don't know. I don't think it's good to make
a lot of times
assumptions.
we have certainly had many situations over the years where all of the insurance, or the policies that could potentially apply are limited, and there are multiple claimants. So with the wrongful death of this gentleman, there maybe has a child or a wife or something, survivors that would be able to benefit from compensation. But and sometimes you do have situations where there's limited coverage, and it becomes what they call a global mediation.
Right,
the insurance company, they said, we tender it all,
They'll
you
just
figure it
tender
out.
it,
But complex legal issues, including being sure that all of the applicable insurance has actually been identified. So any serious accident with any kind of significant injury is something that warrants a review with an attorney that handles these types of claims.
100%. So I think that this is a good segue into a pedestrian incident, because of course that's kind of been our theme a little bit here. And this was recent as well. Just, I want to say maybe 2 weeks ago. And I think I did hear about this on the news. I'll see if it rings a bell for you, but this is over in St. Pete Beach. There was a hit and run involving a driver that's facing DUI charge in that crash, and the pedestrian did end up with serious injuries. So there was a woman who was arrested after a hit and run crash that left a 56-year-old pedestrian critically injured near the roadway in St. Pete Beach, according to the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. According to the investigators, the crash happened shortly after 9 p.m. near Gulf Boulevard and 45th Avenue. Deputies say that Paula Poe was found lying along the southbound curb with life-threatening injuries that appeared to be from being hit by a vehicle. Deputies said that the suspect's vehicle was seen traveling southbound on Gulf Boulevard and left debris behind at the scene. Later that day, the deputies located the suspect and her vehicle in a hotel parking lot in Terra Verde. The driver was identified according to Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, and investigators say that she showed signs of impairment and performed poorly on her field sobriety tests. She was arrested and faces charges of DUI, refusal to submit to testing, leaving the scene of the crash with serious bodily injury, and she was taken to Pinellas County Jail. As a side note, we had a criminal defense lawyer on the show I want to say maybe 2 months ago, and that the law has also changed with refusal. That's now a crime in and of itself.
Okay.
So you can get a misdemeanor now just for refusing. So the law just changed on that a few months ago. It used to, I think, just result in maybe a suspension of the license if you refuse. Now it's a separate
Actual misdemeanor or something.
Yep. So, but anyway, back to the civil aspect of it. I wanted to take a look at this one because I wanted to get your take on how some of these things may come into play. The fact that there was an initial hit and run. Eventually they did find her. So it's not like she's an unknown person.
So did but they found her some significant time after the accident, or did they find
it? It doesn't say how long after they located her. So that part I don't know.
It must have been.
It had to be pretty soon after if they were able to do that.
Yeah.
But then I said, she showed signs of impairment and she did field sobriety test. So, so I think it's safe to assume that it was shortly thereafter, but she did leave the scene.
Yeah.
Did not stay and did not obviously check on the woman who sustained serious injuries. Then we have the fact that there's suspected DUI. Now, let's assume that that's something that has been confirmed now. DUI, leaving of the scene. Do these factors play any role at all in the civil negligence claim? And if so, how?
Yes. Yeah, no, again, the civil negligence is always looking at negligence. It is negligence to get behind the wheel with and be impaired, obviously. And so these factors, normally when you have a DUI type circumstance in an auto accident, usually you're not going to see a contest on liability, because if the person has insurance, then the insurance company hires a lawyer to represent them, and that lawyer does not want a jury to hear all about how the person was intoxicated. So
that is not something. So
we caused that. So it's so that's always going to be a factor in that way. Yeah. So and a lot of times people have difficulty with that because they'll be so outraged, rightly so, by the person's having gotten behind the wheel and driven when they shouldn't have, obviously. But if that's taken off the plate, then the issue becomes, which is so often the case, okay, what are the
liabilities
injuries?
Been admitted, so now what?
Yeah, so then it's like, what are the extent of injuries? Now, obviously, this lady, unfortunately, will have had some significant injuries, but, hopefully she recovers reasonably well, and then it becomes...
Let me see, is this the one? Did it give me... I want to make sure I don't misstate her injuries. Oh, it just says life-threatening, so we don't know. We don't know the full extent of it, but it sounds pretty severe.
No, it doesn't sound good. And you get whacked by a car.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
Yeah.
Not good.
So then does the fact that, she left her on the side of the road and drove away, and those things tend to come in when we're talking an admission of liability? Do you get to get those facts in?
Probably not, because if all aspects of liability and negligence are admitted, then there's nothing for the jury to have to decide on that issue.
Right.
So it would be things that, there might be circumstances where if the woman's, the defendant said something, it could open the door to bringing in information, but most likely not. The only way it would, in theory, I think, play some role is in the concept of punitive damages.
You anticipated my next question. So let's talk about that. What are punitive damages?
So punitive damages are the kind of damages that punish the person for outrageous conduct. And the law has, over time, tried to be somewhat restrictive on these so that it is truly the most egregious of circumstances. And almost everybody in an accident where anybody does anything, particularly has anything to drink, you're going to feel like that could apply, and it could, and certainly that would be outrageous conduct to drive when you're impaired. But as a practical matter, it's the insurance policies will not cover punitive damages. Those are always excluded. They'll cover the ordinary damages that you would be entitled to. And I've found over the years, I'm sure you have too, that often the kinds of things that make people angry, and of course they're not going to hear about these facts because the defense lawyer will try to keep it out. But many times that those things are kind of play a part of how people assess what the overall damages that they want to award for that intangible pain and suffering will consist of. But here, now, let's say the person was, well, actually, we could think of that there was the terrible accident with the trolleys and the boat that we talked about. And
I want to say, was that last?
Not maybe 6 months within the last. It's not that long ago. And I think
I'm sure litigation is ongoing, and
because I believe the criminal
owner was arrested at some point.
So you could have a situation if you have a person that actually does have the financial capability to respond to a judgment. Then those are situations where if something has occurred that would warrant punitive damages, then that would be a factor that would be considered for sure.
Right. And sometimes you'll notice in the award when that is allowed in the courts, and there is an award that's given for punitive, that can be a very large number, even more so than what you might see for the general liability. So, but that's interesting. I think that's a lot of I think confusion for some people when they like you said, they want that part to be
right, because it is outrageous, and you feel like this shouldn't have happened. Really, I mean, there are accidents that are, accidents. They may be negligent, but it's at least more understandable. But when it's something like that, people are understandably upset about it.
Rightfully so, and I think it's sad for a lot of folks to realize that some of the things that are so important and so egregious in a lot of the cases sometimes aren't as relevant as people may think. And that's why we do what we do, so that people have a better understanding of how these things do play out ultimately, once they get in front of a jury. So I hope you learned something today, folks, all of our faithful listeners, and that you enjoyed the show, because this is what we do every Tuesday at 5:00. So of course, tell family members and friends about it. And of course, you had the pleasure of hearing from my colleague, Lorrie Robinson. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Always a pleasure.
As you know, we'll be back here next Tuesday at 5:00. We have some great guests lined up this month. I believe we have next week a family law attorney. She's also currently the president of the Clearwater Bar Association. The week after, we have a tax attorney who's going to be talking about that tax deadline. And then we also have a real estate attorney this month. So we've got some really good guests lined up for you, and we will see you all next week at 5:00. Thanks you for tuning in to FLA Law on the radio. Have a good night.